Oh, now that's a big reveal.
Yeah, it was.
President Trump hits the road again to sell his tax reform plan to the people, this time with a special focus on truckers. Good morning to you. Welcome to Happening Now. I'm John Scott.
Good morning. I'm Melissa Francis. The president stopping in Pennsylvania later today where he'll speak to a crowd at the Harrisburg International Airport. And big rigs will be part of the background. President Trump will pitch his plan as a boon to truckers who are expected to make up a good portion of his audience tonight. During a White House meeting with Henry Kissinger yesterday, the president saying his strategy will benefit all Americans.
People want to see tax cuts, they want to see major reductions in their taxes, and they want to see tax reform, and that's what we're doing.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live from the North Lawn with more on this one. What do we expect, John?
Melissa, good morning to you. You know, very often big rig trucks are used as a security screen at outdoor events that the president attends, but today they will be a big part of the plan as the president continues to sell his plans for tax reform, trying to make it difficult for members of Congress, particularly members of Congress on the Democratic side who are up for re-election in 2018, difficult to say no to him. He's got that speech in Harrisburg later on today, scheduled for 5:45. He'll speak predominantly to a group of truckers and owners of trucking companies, saying that they will benefit from the president's tax plan. In the speech, the president will say, quote, "Nothing gets done in America without the hardworking men and women of the trucking industry. When your trucks are moving, America is growing. That is why my administration has taken historic steps to remove the barriers that slow you down. America first means putting American truckers first." Andy Puzder, who is the former chief executive of CKE Restaurants and a one-time nominee for Labor Secretary, explained on Fox and Friends this morning how the plan will benefit truckers. Listen here.
This plan is great for small businesses, particularly the lower tax rate for pass-through entities, which are small business, like the trucking companies are going to talk to today. Sure. When they're paying taxes, they're paying this higher individual rate. They'll now be able to pay 25%, which would be great for growth. They can buy more trucks, they can invest, they can hire people. It's an excellent tax plan. It's a tax plan that focuses on growth.
The president also, for the first time today, will make an estimate on what repatriating corporate funds held overseas will mean for taxpayers. The president will say today, quote, "We will impose a one-time low tax on money currently parked overseas so it can be brought back home to America where it belongs. My Council of Economic Advisors estimates that this change alone would likely give the typical American household a $4,000 pay raise." In addition to tax reform and tax cuts, there are some other things on the president's mind, including the NFL letter to owners and chief executives of the teams. Roger Goodell saying that he wants players to stand up for the national anthem. The president tweeting this morning, quote, "It's about time that Roger Goodell of the NFL is finally demanding that all players stand for our great national anthem, respect for our country." The president also going off on a story on NBC News that he wanted a tenfold increase in the nuclear arsenal. The president tweeting, quote, "Fake NBC News made up a story that I wanted a tenfold increase in our U.S. nuclear arsenal. Pure fiction, made up to demean NBC equals CNN." In addition to all of that, Melissa, the president's going to be meeting with Prime Minister McDreamy of Canada, Justin Trudeau on the table during that meeting, NAFTA, and a huge duty that the Department of Commerce wants to levy against new Canadair regional jets that Delta Airlines wants to buy. So that meeting could be a little bit tense later on today. Melissa?
McDreamy? Is that what you
yes.
said, John Roberts?
Prime Minister McDreamy.
I love it. All right, boy, busy day.
Ask any woman in America. They'll tell you.
Well, I don't know. You may have just stepped in it there, my friend. I'm not sure I consider him McDreamy, but I've been following his politics, so there you go.
Come and talk to some of the staffers here at the White House.
Okay.
They'll disagree with you.
John Roberts, thank you so much.
President Trump pushing his message on Twitter this morning ahead of his big speech this evening. The president tweeting, quote, "Stock market has increased by $5.2 trillion since the election on November 8th, a 25% increase, lowest unemployment in 16 years. And if Congress gives us the massive tax cuts and reform I'm asking for, those numbers will grow by leaps and bounds. Hashtag MAGA," and you know what that means. Joining us now, Jake Sherman, senior writer for Politico and co-author of Politico's Playbook. Kind of interesting, he's really pitching this to the trucking industry tonight. Jake, why?
I think he wants to make the case at this point that it's going to be a tax cut for middle-income Americans. It's going to be a tax cut for small businesses. That doesn't paper over some of the issues he has here on Capitol Hill. Number one, he started a massive fight with Bob Corker, who's a critical vote on the budget and a critical vote for tax reform or against tax reform. He has a number of other senators he needs to win over on this proposal. But listen, every president tries to build support from the outside. President Obama did it. President Trump is doing it. It's a smart strategy, but it doesn't really work. It doesn't replace personal relationships that you need to have on Capitol Hill with individual lawmakers.
Interesting, as you're talking about his relationships in the Senate, he has pitched his tax plan in Missouri, in Indiana, in North Dakota, all of those states that have potentially vulnerable Democratic senators who are up for re-election. Bob Casey of Pennsylvania also up for re-election, and the president just happens to be going to Pennsylvania tonight. What about that?
Well, listen, there's no, let's be clear here. This is, if the president plays his cards right on Capitol Hill and gets a tax plan that Republicans could rally on and that does not drastically cut taxes for the upper income Americans, millionaires and higher, he could get some Democrats to rally around it. Because listen, at the end of the day, in an election year or close to an election year, if you say, this is a tax bill that's going to cut taxes for a lot of Americans, it's going to be difficult if it doesn't lower taxes for rich people. It's difficult to vote against it. Either you're for tax cuts or you're not. That's what Republicans up here think the dynamics will be if the president plays his cards right. If he continues to anger and to browbeat Republican senators and members of the House, this is not even a discussion worth having because it's not going to get through.
But this tax plan proposes lowering the top rate from 39.6% to 35% with the caveat, as we understand it, that Congress can set a higher level than 35% for upper income earners. Is that enough to quell any disagreements or any qualms among Democrats?
Well, I once thought it would be unthinkable that they would put an upper rate for millionaires and higher. I do think that's a likely scenario at this point, and it's a great talking point for Republicans. If they do set a higher rate for super rich, super wealthy Americans, that helps them. It helps make the case for Republicans that this is a middle class tax cut, not cutting taxes for the wealthy. So there's a really narrow political road to travel here, and we'll see if the president can do it.
When I listen to my friends on Fox Business Network, Melissa Francis among them, they say that part of the reason the stock market is where it is with this $5 trillion of additional value created since the election, because the folks on Wall Street are expecting tax reform will go through. What happens if this all blows up?
As I talk to people that I know on Wall Street, I tell them they have irrational exuberance that this is going to be an easy thing to do. And partially the White House and congressional Republicans have set expectations that this will get done by the end of the year. Listen, I'm not a market expert, John. That we'll have to kick it over to Fox Business for that. But markets do look forward, right? I mean, markets look at what's happening in the future, but they often don't take cues from what has happened in the past. And I've been covering Congress for nearly a decade, and I've seen them squirm around on a lot easier things like repealing health care. So, I count me as skeptical, but as I said, there is a path for the president to go on here.
All right. Skeptical Jake Sherman from Politico's Playbook. Nice to have you on. See you again soon. Thanks.
So more actresses are coming forward to say Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein sexually harassed them over the course of several decades. Now his wife says she's leaving him. The allegations have been pouring in since they first surfaced in a New York Times article almost a week ago.
I do not think that Harvey Weinstein understands or comprehends how much pain and suffering this brings to me and scores of other women. I implore other women to please stand up and to come forward. I know there's many women who have experienced just what I've experienced. Let us be the change we want to see in this world.
There you go. Jonathan Hunt is live in Los Angeles. The story just keeps getting bigger, Jonathan.
Yeah, and Melissa, this morning, Harvey Weinstein is reportedly in Europe at a rehab center for sexual addiction as his former friends continue to desert him amid this cascading collection of abuse allegations. Hillary Clinton says she's, quote, appalled. President and Mrs. Obama say they are disgusted, and they add in a statement, quote, any man who demeans and degrades women in such fashion needs to be condemned and held accountable regardless of wealth and status. A who's who of Hollywood that once revered or feared Harvey Weinstein is now condemning him. Jennifer Lawrence, George Clooney, Leo DiCaprio, Meryl Streep, all expressing horror at what he did. Gwyneth Paltrow and Angelina Jolie saying they were both victims of Weinstein's predatory ways. And Weinstein's wife of 10 years has announced she plans to divorce him. Georgina Chapman saying, quote, my heart breaks for all the women who have suffered tremendous pain because of these unforgivable actions. I have chosen to leave my husband. Caring for my young children is my first priority, and I ask the media for privacy at this time. Now, Harvey Weinstein is reportedly complaining that his brother Bob was instrumental in making the lurid allegations public. Bob Weinstein, for his part, tells TMZ Harvey is a, quote, very sick man. Harvey Weinstein has not made any public statements since last week, Melissa. We've reached out repeatedly to the PR firm and the PR representative, Sally Hoffmeister, who is supposed to be speaking for Harvey Weinstein. Neither she nor the company appears willing to speak to us at this point. Melissa?
Wow. Jonathan Hunt, thank you for that report.
Sure.
Well, it looks like President Trump is going to decertify the Iran nuclear deal, but does that mean the U.S. will withdraw from the agreement?
Clear majorities on this committee and in the House opposed the nuclear deal. Ultimately, however, the Obama administration rammed it through anyway.
Right now, new information on some crime stories we are watching. Opening statements in the trial of a Mississippi man charged with murdering a 19-year-old cheerleader. He's accused of burning her alive in her car. He claims he thought she was already dead when he set the car on fire. An Oregon man held without bail in a drunk driving accident that killed a 25-year-old woman and her 4 young children. His blood alcohol level almost 4 times the legal limit. In New York, a drug lord gets 14 years in prison for running a $50 million operation out of his apartment. Jose Hippie Mercedes is notorious for sending his son to a Mexican cartel as collateral for a drug deal.
Breaking this hour, President Trump has been signaling his plans to decertify the Iran nuclear deal. GOP leadership is blasting Tehran for what they call violations of the agreement, expanding Iran's nuclear capabilities beyond its domestic needs.
Iran's continued pursuit of intercontinental ballistic missiles, funded by the cash bonanza it received when sanctions were lifted, is telling. No country has run such an expensive program without also seeking nuclear warheads to go on top. These missiles are designed to hit us.
Joining me now is Michael Singh. He's former Senior Director of Middle Eastern Affairs of the National Security Council and Managing Director of the Washington Institute. Sir, thank you for joining me. There is an explosive report that is coming out today. It is 52 pages long, and our own Holly McKay here at FoxNews.com got an exclusive look at it. That's called Iran's Nuclear Core, Unsuspected Military Sites. And they basically say the more they investigated, the more they realized that the weaponization program is fully operational. In other words, they're already there. They already have the weapon. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, I think that report's at odds with the findings of our intelligence community, and so I think you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But I think the real issue, Melissa, is that Iran has said that it won't allow inspections at these nuclear sites, and the prohibitions on Iran's weaponization research, which are contained in the nuclear agreement, aren't subject to monitoring or verification. I think it's details like this, it's flaws like this in the deal that we may see the Trump administration trying to correct in the days ahead.
But that's exactly what this group says, is that those sites that you're talking about that aren't open to inspection, that things have been moved around, that there are silos, that they are totally not monitored, and that their domestic program has just been a front for their military program. And as they've looked at the movement and the development, they can tell they're already there. I mean, it may be at odds with what our government is saying because they don't want to call it a missile until they've actually seen it, but they can't get in to investigate. The international community can't.
Right. Again, it's hard to really sort of comment on the veracity of the report. It's hard to know what intelligence our own government may have. But I think the point is, Melissa, that if we're to know whether these types of allegations are true or false, we need to have transparency. We need to have, I think, a tighter inspection regime than we currently have. And so, again, as we think about sort of the way forward with the Iran nuclear agreement, I think this demonstrates there are sort of concrete ways to strengthen it that would give us more confidence that Iran isn't pursuing a clandestine program.
So along those lines, Ed Royce was on America's Newsroom earlier today, and he didn't think necessarily that decertification was the way to achieve what you just said and what we all agree we need. Here were his thoughts.
Force the hell out of the current agreement, and I would figure out how to get the buy-in in order to get onto the military bases in terms of the investigative powers. I would keep the existing agreement and add to it. I think that's the better approach in order to address these concerns we have, because that keeps the Europeans on board working with us, and that's ultimately the goal.
The fact of the matter is, when President Obama sold this agreement, he said there were anytime, anywhere inspections and there were snapback sanctions. We never saw those things, and we definitely never saw anytime, anywhere inspections. Is there any way they're going to agree to that?
Well, I think, Melissa, that if President Trump decertifies, which is what everyone expects, it's a pretty strong signal from him that he's dissatisfied with the agreement and he doesn't think that it's accomplishing the objectives that it set out to accomplish. And I think that probably it'll be an effort to gain leverage by creating this possibility of the U.S. withdrawing to get the others to agree to not only enforce it better, as Congressman Royce was suggesting there, but also address the things which aren't in the agreement, like Iran's missile program, which is key to developing a nuclear weapon, or Iran's support for terrorism in the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, we will watch and see, because it's certainly a very scary and important issue. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Melissa.
It is almost Halloween, of course, so you can expect spooky things all around, but one 3-year-old has been really spooked, and not in a fun way. Also, California wineries decimated by the out-of-control wildfires. We are live in Napa.
Amazingly tragic event, but we were all able to get out, and we're back here today for the first time to just see what was left, if anything, and really just it's as you can see, devastation. There's nothing left. So.
All right, it's one thing when you're 3 years old to get lost at the mall or someplace like that, but imagine the horror of getting left behind in a corn maze. That's what happened to a toddler who was found cold and in tears at the edge of an 8-acre maze in Utah. It took 12 hours for his parents to go looking for him. Police, as you might expect, are investigating.
The experience was horrifying. On Sunday night, we were awoken to a red glow coming out of the north, and had just minutes to actually get out of the house, wake our kids up. We called our neighbor, woke her up, and it was just a mad dash. It was chaos.
Fast-moving wildfires in California's wine country have now taken at least 17 lives and destroyed thousands of homes and offices and stores, leaving the area covered in ash and debris. Hillary Vaughn is live now with more. You're in front of a winery which has been reduced to rubble. Wow, look at that.
Melissa, this is a snapshot of some of the carnage that has been left behind by these fires whipping through Napa Valley, taking out businesses, homes, wineries, fields of plants in its path. You can see over here the field is black after the path of the fire tore through here, still black. Some of it in places still smoldering. And then behind me, this was a tasting room where a lot of people stopped to enjoy wine. This has been reduced to rubble and will need to be built back up from the ground up. But then over here, you can see a lot of the land remaining untouched. So where the fire tore through, decimated everything, but there are portions that haven't been touched. The two big fires threatening California wine country here in Napa, the Atlas fire is only 3% contained, and the Tubbs fire tearing through Northern California has grown to 28,000 acres. Those two fires combined are putting 21,000 businesses, homes, and other structures at risk. The CAL FIRE chief Ken Pimlott says they dumped record numbers of fire retardant, 266,000 gallons, and they've deployed just about every firefighting aircraft asset in the country.
Our focus continues to be on life safety, getting people out from the front of these fires, and then engaging in that perimeter control. We can't keep our guard down. We are looking at fire weather conditions and potential red flag warnings returning for later in the week, possibly as early as tomorrow.
As many as 17 people have died. Over 25,000 have been evacuated, with at least 28 new evacuation orders coming overnight. And the Sonoma County Sheriff says that there are still about 200 people missing and unaccounted for. We talked to some homeowners that were evacuated in this area. They were able to go back after the fire passed and survey some of the damage. Here's how they describe what they saw.
Unfortunately, a lot of chimneys, refrigerators, washers, and dryers that are still standing, and that's about it.
11 of the shelters are now at capacity, and the largest veterans home in the U.S. It houses at least 1,000 disabled veterans had to be partially evacuated last night, and also a red flag alert, the highest alert for fire conditions. The National Weather Service has issued that starting at 5 p.m. tonight, Melissa.
Hillary Vaughn, so tragic. Thanks for the report.
The fraud and conspiracy case involving the former IT aide to Congressman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, it's getting even more bizarre. The new details emerging now, and how they raise questions about the one-time chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee. Plus, we're live on Capitol Hill while the president pushes his tax reform plan with a big speech tonight. How lawmakers are reacting to his proposals. Can he get it passed? The former White House press secretary Ari Fleischer weighs in next. Just in, the president getting ready to take his tax reform plan on the road with a speech in Pennsylvania tonight. His team is already touting the plan's benefits. Listen.
It's a major tax cut, and it's also tax overhaul. That's the simplification part. 91% of Americans, we need a simpler, fairer system that doesn't benefit the wealthy.
Joining us now is Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary for President George W. Bush, a Fox News contributor as well. Republicans, obviously, Ari, are desperate for a legislative win. They haven't had a big one yet on Capitol Hill. Is this tax reform plan the possible vehicle?
Well, more importantly, the country is desperate for a booming, growing economy that lifts the wages of low-income workers and middle-income workers. And that's why Republicans, and hopefully some Democrats, need to pass tax reform. Tax reform is probably the single biggest tool the government has to affect the economy. It touches so many different lives in so many different ways, and it gives people incentives to work and grow and prosper, and businesses to hire more and pay more. That's why the Congress has got to get this done.
But the devil, as you know, is in the details, and some of these members of Congress are worried that cutting the number of brackets down to 3, reducing some deductions and exemptions, that it's going to actually boost taxes on some constituents.
Well, the point is, what does it do for the overall economy? I'm sure they're going to take a look at all the different ways you can slice it for this group and that group. But what's most important is that economy grows as a result. Look, for the last 10 years, we've had dismal economic growth. And if we had stronger growth, people would have higher paychecks, more money every week from their private sector employees instead of redistributed by the government. And the deficits would actually go down. You know, the deficit, since President Obama raised taxes, The deficit has gone up in the last 2 years. So what you really need is growth. And the reason the deficits are going up because growth has been so weak, so poor, particularly for middle income and low income workers. We need to capture what tax reform can do. And I'm worried a lot less about whether one individual slice gets a raise or a decrease, including myself. If I got a tax hike, I'd be fine with it, so long as the economy prospers.
So, all right, so deficits, you bring that up. Republican Party is generally one that doesn't like talk of deficits. Again, there are critics who are looking at these numbers and saying if you cut taxes this much, you're going to build the deficit. Your response?
Well, that's my point about President Obama raised taxes, and you know what? The deficit's gone up for the last 2 years in a row. And the reason is because growth is so paltry. You know, I was part of the Congress on the staff job in the 90s when we had a Balanced Budget Act passed. And you know what got it passed? Revenues surged before we even agreed to a deal because the economy was booming. That's what these guys in Washington need to keep their focus on. Get the economy booming, and if the economy booms, it is the best thing for blue-collar workers, working-class Americans, and low-income Americans who want to become middle-income Americans. It's what separates America from redistributionist Europe. It's the entrepreneurial productivity spirit. It's capitalism, and we need a boost to grow the economy, not just redistribute money from one to another.
But talk about the politics of this. Republicans control both chambers of Congress. Yeah. They couldn't get repeal and replacement of Obamacare done. Tax reform, it is said, is even a more thorny issue because there are so many camps that want to have a piece of the pie. Can Republicans pull this off?
John, let me make you a prediction. It will pass in the House. I think the House has the strength and the numbers to do it. And then it will be a severe test of the United States Senate. And if the United States Senate cannot somehow get to 50 votes, then why are they there? After the failure to repeal and replace Obamacare, and if they can't focus on economic well-being for all Americans, what on earth are they doing in Washington? This is a severe test about the Senate and about our ability as Americans to self-govern. If they can't get these things done, it's been 10 years then since any major legislation was passed, and Republicans run it all. It's the job of Republicans to pass it.
Phrased like a political spokesman.
A distraught one.
All right. Ari Fleischer, it's good to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
There are now reports that a mainstream media outlet knew about the Harvey Weinstein sexual assault allegations, but chose not to report the story.
Harvey Weinstein is an extremely powerful man, an absolute bully, and he clearly had an MO and something that he did. I mean, you were aware of it. Everybody knew.
Some Democrats finally condemning Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein for allegations of sexual harassment against him. It has been 6 days since the New York Times published an investigative piece about Weinstein paying off his accusers. Just yesterday, Hillary Clinton released a statement, and so did former President Barack Obama, saying, quote, "Michelle and I have been disgusted by the recent reports about Harvey Weinstein. Any man who demeans and degrades women in such fashion needs to be condemned and held accountable, regardless of his wealth or status." Our Media Buzz host, Howie Kurtz, joins me, along with Fox News contributor and syndicated radio talk show host Leslie Marshall, and former presidential writer for George W. Bush and CEO of the American Majority, Ned Ryan, is also here. But Howie, I want to start with you, and I want to talk about these reports that NBC News had the story. They knew about the allegations. Ronan Farrow had done his investigative reporting with them or for them. They had the tape, and they decided not to go with the story. What do you know about that?
That is absolutely true, and we know it's true because Ronan Farrow said so last night on MSNBC. Here's exactly what he said. "I walked into the door at the New Yorker," this is after NBC declined to run with this story, "with an explosively reportable piece that should have been public earlier." Now, NBC's spin, which I am not buying, is that, well, it didn't meet our high standards, and he didn't have then what he had later. But NBC had this as recently as August. New Yorker chose to publish it on the record allegations from numerous women, denied by Harvey Weinstein, we should add, but nevertheless, major embarrassment for NBC. Is the biggest scandal.
And the tape. I mean, they had an actual. The tape is horrifying when you listen to it. And they had that. So it's not, you can't even say that there was no way to corroborate these stories. They had many women on the record, but the tape.
Well, maybe some of the women hadn't yet agreed to be on the record, but the tape, the audio tape, is absolutely chilling. This is an Italian model 2 years ago who was wearing a wire in New York Police Department after she says that Harvey Weinstein groped her. The next day you hear him trying to badger her to go into a room with him alone. He acknowledges the groping the previous day on this tape. That in and of itself would have been a story. And so you have to question, Melissa, the business relationships between NBC's Universal Pictures, NBC's Bravo, and Harvey Weinstein's company. They were cross-producing and distributing different TV and movie products. Was it that? Was it the fact that Harvey Weinstein's a big Democratic donor and a progressive that made NBC's appetite a little less voracious for this story? But clearly, NBC could have broken this story, chose not to, and it's hard to understand that decision.
It's very hard to understand because they did have that financial relationship that you talked about there, and it's very tangled and it goes deep, and that's part of the reason Harvey Weinstein spreading his influence and his money into so many different places is part of the reason why people were reluctant to come forward. If you add then a news organization that's reluctant to come forward, even though they have a tape from the New York Police Department, it gets to be really hairy. How much pressure do you think, what happens to NBC as a result of this?
Well, I mean, just to make clear, Ronan Farrow is NBC's guy, special correspondent, used to host a show on MSNBC. It's not like he's just some freelancer. So NBC, I think, enough with the blind quotes, needs to explain on the record, top executive, why it made this decision. And I think it's just a question of its reputation. NBC also, didn't go with the Access Hollywood tape, Access Hollywood having a business relationship with NBC as well. It's easy. There are a lot of journalists, apparently, who were intimidated by Harvey Weinstein or who looked the other way, but NBC had this story in its corporate hands and walked away from it. That is not NBC's finest hour by any shot.
Leslie, this is why we're also focused on the political angle of this, is that one of the reasons that someone is able to get away with this kind of behavior is because they do have financial influence all over the place, and that, giving donations to so many in the Democratic Party, even employing his production company, employing President Obama's daughter as an intern. I mean, he really had his reach and his tentacles everywhere.
Yes, he did. But this is not about political side or ideology. This is about power, and it is about money, but power even more so. We saw that happen here in Hollywood with Bill Cosby. For years, some of these women that have now come forward together as a unified force, they called media, and everybody turned their back because it's Bill Cosby. Everybody loves Bill Cosby. That can't be true. So I think it's power, and certainly in Hollywood,
it is about politics,
there is
though,
that it can't be true.
Leslie, if I can stop you for a second, it is about politics because he was spreading his influence through donations all over the Democratic Party, and it was another way of ensuring that, he had some recourse. The same way when he went out and asked people, please speak up for me, he felt like he had bought off everyone, I would think. Ned, what do you think?
No, Melissa, I think one of the bigger parts of this story is the fact not just the hundreds of thousands that Weinstein gave directly to the Democrat Party, it's the millions and millions of dollars that he helped raise for the Democrat Party. We're talking about one of the major financiers of the Democrat Party who's a sexual predator. And it's, I'm glad the Clintons and Obamas finally found it within themselves to condemn this behavior. But I think one of the things that's not really being addressed is the fact that Harvey Weinstein gave over $300,000 to the DNC. They've given $30,000 of that away to other Democrats.
Yeah.
That's like moving money from your checking to your savings account and claiming you cleansed your hands of this money. But the bigger story, Melissa, is they still have over $270,000 of his money in their accounts. Yeah. They can't give it away. You know why? With their debt figured in September, the DNC only had $2.7 million. So you're seeing this is at a very bad time for the Democrat Party. They are struggling financially. And now you have one of their major financiers who, it turns out, is a sexual predator.
Leslie, do you think that this eventually reveals more of the predators that are out there? I know they still exist in news. I know that they exist across the entertainment industry. They certainly exist in music. There is so much damage, and then there's the collateral damage as well. The Weinstein Company was my book publisher. I know many hard-working people at that company who are now sitting there going, now what? They didn't know. They had a career. They worked hard. I mean, that's additional collateral damage beyond the people who obviously are the biggest victims, who are the actual firsthand victims. But the damage is so great. I mean, have we gotten to a point where we're going to start rooting these people out?
Well, I hope so, Melissa. You know, I think personally I've been the victim of sexual harassment over my years in this business, and I and many other women were afraid because of those people in power or people above them, even more powerful, who you may fear wouldn't listen to you. I hope this urges people to come out, and I think this is actually why there is a hesitancy, quite frankly, when information first comes out in this culture of fake news, if you will, for people to wait. The president waited. Hillary Clinton waited. Former President Barack Obama waited to say something. And even these women certainly have waited a long time to come forward. It takes a lot of guts. They were brave. They were courageous. But I do think it is a green light for others, not only against this, but any perpetrator, regardless of their political leanings, to come forward so that justice can be done.
Ned, real quick, I'll give you the last word.
No, I think in some ways this is a microcosm of what took place in 2016. People were sick of a ruling class, of a protected class of people, whether it was D.C., New York, or Hollywood, and they're just rejecting this this elitism where they all protected each other, and it turns out they're nothing but a bunch of big hypocrites. So I think, you know, again, this is why 2016 happened, and I hope we'll see more of this being revealed and people rejecting it.
Okay. Thanks to all three of you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
The search for a missing Arizona woman enters its 5th day. Police now interviewing the last person who saw her, as her family also begs for answers.
We love Catherine so much, and we're hoping that they find her very soon.